Welcome everybody to this session of the Atlantic Dialogues of this year. I'm Ivan Martin, and I'm Senior Fellow at the Policy Center for the New South, and I will have the honor to moderate this session today on behalf of the Policy Center. We have four main speakers, but one of them apparently couldn't attend. So today we will have three young entrepreneurs, but with quite a lot of experience with us to contribute and to talk about a topic which is very hot in all kinds of discussions these days, which is the topic of the future of work. The session today is titled the Reworking the Work Model. And for that, we have a very Atlantic panel today. On the one hand, Hannah Besat, who comes from Morocco and is actually now in Washington, D.C. Secondly, we have Prince Budo, who comes from Ghana, but is currently in Germany. And we have also Juanio Mujica, who comes from Peru, but is actually now in Italy, and myself, who is in Tunisia, at the other side of the Mediterranean as well. And for that, I will let themselves actually to introduce themselves in their first round of interventions. But I would like just to underline that the issue of the future of work has imposed itself as a key topic on the transformation of the economy, both for technological reasons, for COVID-19 related reasons as well. But I would say also for the new models of mobility that young people are imposing as part of their professional career and as part of their lifelong training. Just for you to know, as this session of the Atlantic Dialogues is taking place, the OECD is convening exactly at this very moment another panel on the future of work as well, also online. So I won't take more time to introduce the topic. We will have a little bit more than 1 hour to discuss the different aspects of this issue. And I will ask the three panelists to make a first intervention, introducing yourself, explaining us what is your relation to this topic and why it is a topic of interest for you. And this will serve as a nice introduction to each of you. And finally, presenting what is your understanding. What does the future of work means for you and this reworking of the work model. This will be a nice opening, I think, of the discussion, and then we will eventually explore other aspects of it. So let's begin with Hannah Besat. Hannah, the floor is you, maybe for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ivan. So thank you, everyone. Very happy to take part in this session and share the floor with the other Adels. One of which is in my class, actually. So I'm Hannah Besat, and I'm French entrepreneur, French-Moroccan entrepreneur, actually. I grew up in Morocco. I studied in France and partially in the US. I spent about a decade in France, started my career in France, and eventually went to Barcelona to learn coding back in 2016. And from there, took a path back to Morocco to set up a coding school in Casablanca. In Barcelona, I discovered the world of digital nomads. I took part in a boot camp. We were 14 people, 10 nationalities. Everyone was working remotely, and it was a massive discovery for me and really a step into the new life I was about to explore. When I set up the coding school in Casablanca, the idea was to receive people from Morocco, develop talents from Morocco, from the African continent as well, from the African diaspora, but also digital nomads. And this is exactly what we've done. Aside from it, I'm also the founder of the social tech inclusive hub, Duar Tech, that is more focused on vulnerable communities, so targeting youth in rural areas and peri-urban areas. I set it up also in 2017. And I was very much on the ground for a good 2 years until the team grew. And I could also start a new path in my career and went to Rwanda. So in 2020, right before the pandemic hit in Rwanda, I moved to Kigali and I worked for a year with Smart Africa. So I was based in East Africa for a year. And this year I started the year in Tanzania and Zanzibar. I worked remotely for 2 months, and then I was in Morocco, and then I was in DC, and then back in Morocco. And the last 5 weeks, I've been in 5 different cities. So the topic obviously is very relevant and of importance to me.
Okay, let's go on then maybe to Prince.
Yeah, thank you, Ivan. I'm Prince Budo. So I'm originally from Ghana. I grew up in the capital city, Accra, and then I moved to Kumasi, where I'm currently based whenever I go to Ghana. I'm the co-founder for Kumasi Hive. So Kumasi Hive is a hardware innovation hub that is based in Kumasi, the second largest city in Ghana. We focus on hardware innovations and rapid prototyping of ideas, as well as entrepreneurship support. And we saw a gap in the market in Ghana, especially where a lot of the focus has been on software and competencies of the youth. And so we decided to focus on hardware and see how we can bring together the software and hardware to kind of create employment opportunities. I also co-founded MapTech Logistics, which is an e-logistics company. We basically develop map-based visualization technologies for companies and help companies to basically visualize the assets and their sales performance on the field. Aside that, in the corporate world, I'm a supply chain expert, so I work in pharmaceutical supply chain. So for the past 5 years, I've been based in Germany, working in supply chain management. My recent role was managing the OTCs and personal health medication for Eastern Europe, Central Europe, Southwest Europe, Latin America, Asia, Middle East, and Africa. So I was managing a team here in Germany. This topic really, for me, brings back some personal experiences that I've had, coming from Africa and moving to Europe, and the contrast that I saw by way of how things are done and how the psychology of the employee is completely different from, let's say, West Africa compared to Europe. And I like to more or less focus on the aspect of looking back in order to understand the future. So in order for us to understand the future of work, we need to look at the history of work. In the past, we have come from the industrial economy, where the employee was seen just as a factor of production. So, I mean, we have an output. For example, if we take the assembly line from Henry Ford, we look at the fact that we want to have an output. And in order to get that output, we need human beings. So human beings have always been, in the past, a factor of production. And when we saw human beings that way, we linked their performance to a location. So in other words, they need to be in the factory to do specific repetitive jobs in the assembly line in order to get that expected output. So employment was linked to a location. And that has been, let's say, the way and means by which we have remunerated the employee. And so this kind of also gave rise to some form of compensation factors coming into play. And looking at the fact that we focus on extrinsic motivation by giving the employee some form of salary. So based on your performance at this location, you'll be paid X amount. So that has been the traditional way by which we have compensated the employee. Of course, researchers like Douglas McGregor came up with the theory X and theory Y based on the behavior of employees and so forth. All these evolutions, I think, are very essential in this conversation to understand the future. So that would be, let's say, my approach to first understand what really is the employee or who is the employee and where has that notion come from. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Prince. We will come back to this later for sure. Juan Diego, maybe you may introduce yourself and introduce your approach to the topic.
Thank you, Ivan. And I am very happy to be with all of you during this afternoon. Very happy to share this panel with Anaya and Prince. And my name is Juanio Mujica. I'm a Peruvian legal scholar studying purpose-driven companies. So these are corporations that, besides trying to get profit, they are actively looking for social and environmental impact, delivering it in different fields. These corporations are looking for a new regulatory framework in different countries around the world. I am from Latin America, as I said previously, and I have worked extensively promoting and drafting legal legislation for these corporations to thrive. I studied law school in Peru and later on went to do my Master's of Law at Harvard Law School in the United States. And through my studies, I realized that my generation is looking for a new way to relate with society and environment, a way that it's that has a human-centered design, that is looking for not only our well-being, but the well-being of the people that work around us. And that's why I am deeply interested in this project and in this topic, sorry. And through the project that I lead for 3 international organizations, we have done extensive research about all of these different policies. And these policies and regulations identify workers and the workforce as one of the main aspects or one of the main stakeholders to actually deliver on the terms of what a purpose-driven company is. In that way, I think that my relation to the topic of the future of work is really how do we embed the different SDGs in this topic and how we embed these different findings on well-being and mental health with the innovation, with the engagement and creativity that we need to join the workforce and not be limited by it. I, through my studies and through my professional life, I've had the opportunity to work in a law firm and also in a university and in a research project. And these 3 very specific experiences have showed me how work can be structured and how it can be, like to give you that tools for you to create your own structure and deliver the goals and the challenges that you have. So in that way, I think that we're going to have a very interesting conversation coming from different continents, but also working internationally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see that there are a few elements that emerge from all your self-introductions and your approaches to the topic. One, which is not mentioned explicitly, but comes out very clearly in your profiles, is mobility as one element probably of any future of work. Another one is, you have put it in different ways, but it's technology and connectivity and innovation, the 3 issues. Connectivity is rather, of course, linked to mobility, but technology in different forms as a key driver, a little bit of these new forms of work and this reworking or rethinking of the work model. And then the social and the human dimensions. Juan Diego has put the emphasis rather on social issues, on the SDGs, and Prince was approaching, I would say, was proposing a human approach to employees, which is, of course, very, very welcome. And my next question to all of you, and feel free to intervene in the order that you want, would be, the title of this session is Reworking the Work Model. And this implies that there is one work model. This has never been actually true. We are today already, nowadays, in front of different work models for different categories of people in different areas. You have mentioned, Prince, the mentality, the mindset of the employees is not the same in West Africa than it is in Europe and elsewhere. So my question, since you have in your own professional career, a multi-country, the three of you, a multi-country experience, is whether this reworking of this transformation of the work model means the same for all contexts, for the US, Europe, and Africa, whether it means the same for different categories of people, for skilled or non-skilled workers or entrepreneurs, and whether it means the same also for women and men, which have, in many cases, different contextual constraints, I would say, social constraints. So I would like, this is a wide question, but you can choose an angle of approach to approach it from it. So maybe we can change the order and start by Prince maybe, and then Juan Diego, and then we'll let Hannah to conclude for this round. But feel free to interrupt each other if you want. Prince.
Thank you, Ivan. And I think that's a very important aspect of the conversation, that is regarding context. So even the work model as we know it in Africa or sub-Saharan Africa would be completely different from if you go to North Africa or if you go to Dubai, which recently now moved to the normal working days as was announced. So the work model itself would have to be contextualized in order to fully understand. Now, I want to pick up from where I started from regarding where we are coming from by way of what we know as who an employee is. Like I mentioned earlier, in the past, the employee has been seen as a factor of production. Therefore, if that factor of production is supposed to deliver, then that factor would have to be supervised. So this is where, again, I mentioned about the Douglas McGregor's Theory X, Theory Y models, where Theory X says that employees would have to be supervised, micromanaged, and so forth. And Theory Y says, look, give them the autonomy and let them work. Now, there's an aspect of the conversation that I want us to focus on that has got to do with flexibility of the modern day employee. The employee of today is looking for flexibility, but that flexibility has to be linked with self-determination. So the employee wants to feel fulfilled. I mean, currently at Kumasi Hive, my social enterprise, we have a full-time staff of 47. Now, these 47, these are all young people. Some of them are in their 21, 22, very young, energetic young people. Now, during the COVID, we, for example, experienced that most of our grants had been truncated when we had a lockdown. And I observed an interesting phenomenon where most of these young people came to us as the leaders of the team and said, look, we know the financial situation, so I'm willing to accept a pay cut of 20% less so that we can still stay afloat during the lockdown. This really got me thinking, why would an employee in a developing country, ordinarily, of course, financial incentives are really important. Why would they accept pay cuts during such times? It is because of that sense of belongingness and that sense of self-determination that they find themselves working in an environment that cares for them and cares about them. Now, that is the modern day employee. There are three key things that are essential: autonomy, competency, and relatedness. Autonomy means that in order to ensure the full support of the modern day employee, you need to give them the ability or trust them with the ability to make their own decisions as to even where to work, when to work, which part of the globe they would like to work. It shouldn't matter. because that is really what the modern day employee is looking for. The other thing is competency. Every organization going forward must invest in, tooling, getting the employees the right tools, skill sets for them to perform. Of course, if you are going to ensure autonomy, then there has to be competency to ensure that whatever autonomy that you're giving them will still produce the intended output. And number 3 is relatedness, the ability for an employee to find that, look, they are being cared for, they belong to some form of, in West Africa, we like to call it like a family. So like typically if you're working in Ghana, it's likely your boss knows where you live and comes over sometimes over the weekend to eat, like fufu or bankum, the local dishes, which is completely different in Germany. In Germany, like I don't even have the personal number of my boss. Like it's completely different, right? So of course, within the context of where I'm coming from and what I'm experiencing, I think these 3 are important: autonomy, competency, and of course, relatedness.
Thank you. Maybe Juan Diego?
Thank you, Ivan. I would just like to point out about in this first intervention that to talk about the future of work, we have to talk about the present situation, and I would like to share how it's like for women in my region in Latin America. So it's not that the situation was great before COVID, but COVID has had the demolishing effect on women and their jobs and their work-related situations in the region. There are approximately 118 million women and girls in poverty in Latin America, and COVID has affected women working in the fields that have closed. Entrepreneurship projects regarding tourism, hotel, restaurants, the cultural industry, commerce, fashion, domestic services, and other fields that are predominantly for women have closed or had to close or shut down because of the COVID pandemic in a continent that has where lockdowns have prevailed with very strict measures. There's another data that I would like to share with you, that SMEs in Latin America that belong or are led by women have 11% more chances of close than SMEs owned or led by men. And we have one other fact, that one SME that is owned or led by a woman has a positive impact on at least 4 people that are within her family or in different family groups. And then one of the other things that I would like to comment is that being a re-entrepreneur or being an entrepreneur again, it's much more difficult for women than for men. 33% of workers in the formal sector, they can't come back to their jobs because of a higher demand on taking care of their families. So they are super afraid of going back to work after the COVID pandemic. And then, of course, there is a bias in accessing credit and financing for women that are starting another entrepreneurial project. And then finally, I would like to share with you some other final data about this critical situation that I think is it's something that I'm very passionate about because of my compromise with the Sustainable Development Goal number 5 about gender equality, which is that women in leadership positions, they have started retiring because of being just overburned and with a terrible demand where their let's say performance evaluation has been at times much harder and much harsher than for men. And that's a study conducted by IBM this year that just identifies that 5% of senior managers, VPs, and senior VPs have started retiring because of the COVID pandemic. and not planning to go back to work because of these situations. So in conclusion, I think that I would like to bring out in my intervention that we have a very critical situation on the present of the work model in Latin America, but this critical situation has stressed out mainly women. And I think that we have to talk about it in a very specific way on how to uplift them and the impact that will uplift their families and their networks. So that's one of my main concerns, and that's something that we have been embedding in my current research project on how do we empower women to take leadership positions, given the fact that women are more present in leadership positions and in business ownership positions in purpose-driven companies, and they embed social environmental impact in all of their actions. So I think that that's a topic that it's very, very important on how are we framing this, talking a bit about how are we redefining the work model when the work model as it is or as it was, at least before the COVID pandemic, has been so harsh on 51% of the world population. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Before giving the floor to Hannah on this same topic, I was just for reflection for the rest of the discussion. I want to underline, I mean, you put the emphasis on the impact of COVID, and you provide very overwhelming evidence, in particular in Latin American, how it has affected and is affecting women, and in particular female entrepreneurs. But I would say some of the dynamics and drivers of the change in the world of work were already there well before the COVID. Prince has mentioned the issue of flexibility. And flexibility was already a buzzword discussing of industrial relations for a long time before COVID. I remember already 10 years ago writing about it. So, and I would like just for all of you to reflect before I go for the next round of questions on the risks of this new models in plural, I would say, of work for the different stakeholders, but first and foremost for the workers themselves, of course, because flexibility always comes at the risk, at the cost for somebody. It has a lot of advantages as well in terms of productivity, in terms of adaptability, in terms of autonomy, as you have mentioned before. But it has also some flip side that we shouldn't forget. Hannah, sorry I delayed a little bit your next intervention.
No, thank you very much, Ivan. And thank you very much, Juan Diego, for highlighting the gendered impacts of COVID-19. It is a topic of the highest importance, of course. I'd like to go back to and I respond a little bit to what Prince has mentioned about the theory X, theory Y, and taking from my experience as an entrepreneur and deciding to leave a workplace that was very stable, very safe in Paris to start my entrepreneurial endeavors in Morocco, in a country that has a massive entrepreneurial potential, but where becoming an entrepreneur is not necessarily the path, and especially not as a woman. So I think just like you said, Prince, the discussion on autonomy and values in general is actually a key conversation, and I realized this even more with the purpose and the mission-driven endeavor and initiative that Duartec was, for instance, and is to this day. So this conversation comes at the very beginning. It's not even an HR process. It's really about finding whether there's a fit on the long run, because as much as perhaps you have to have actionable strategy for the short run and to get going, and especially when times of of a pandemic, you really want to make sure that you're onboarding the right people. So I believe a lot of entrepreneurs in Africa in particular are having those conversations. And I believe it stands out as a model for a lot of other places. And especially in the tech space, when I compare the tech space in Africa, that's more of a between nascent, promising, but not yet fully there at achieving its potential, and the Silicon Valley or Europe. But sometimes I find a lot more maturity in how we approach the relationship between employees and employers, because the human aspect of it is central. It's the trust that we need to lay down. Now, the value conversation is interesting and is fundamental, but I want to remind us that we are speaking here in a panel of people that have access to this flexibility of being able to work in multiple countries. I myself spent 10 years in France and eventually became a French citizen. So without passport, I do have the possibility to go every now and then in Europe without an issue. I'm now in the US, and I must say that I've been considering relocating my base in the US, and I find them very behind when it comes to having the proper legal settings and visas for allowing for this flexibility. As much as I set up an LLC in the US, I'm still considering other paths now to be able to allow myself for the level of mobility that I want to have and that fits my needs. So yeah, aspects of citizenship, work permit, legislations that really cater for the needs of employees, employers are to be addressed. Now, we also want to make sure that employers do not forget their responsibility when we talk about, yes, flexibility, hybrid models. At the end of the day, the employers have to also cater for the needs of their employees when it comes to healthcare in particular. So I've seen here in the US, a lot of companies are competing to show how they care, how they are creating inclusive workspaces, bringing on board more underrepresented minorities and so on, doing a lot for women, childcare support, etc. But yeah, I think everyone needs to really sit and assess seriously what are they doing. I have the example of a former colleague of mine who works at a Pan-African institution. She was based in Kigali. She's now in the US because she managed to work remotely and take on herself that her the health benefits that she was getting was only in East Africa, yet she was pregnant with her third child and she was not getting the support that she needed in Kigali. So she took it on herself and basically invested in whatever additional insurance she needed to be able to stay in a place where she could deliver her baby in a safe way, in the way that was fitted best for her needs. And again, we're talking about somehow a privileged situation because she had access to it. I'm thinking of all the other women that do not have access to this support. It is an emergency to implement genderless policies and make them mandatory, create indexes, create, say, nudges for employers to do better, but also implement legislations that really frame a space where people feel safe and can do the work the best way they can. So I very much celebrate flexibility, but we also need to look at the basics and the Maslow pyramid. It's fundamental.
Any answer, Prince?
Yes, thanks, Anna, for that input. I think that for me, when I consider, this issue about citizenship, and I have so many examples. I can't even imagine. So in 2013, for example, just to reinforce the points that you've made, Hannah, regarding the citizenship and the role it plays in this topic of flexibility and mobility. In 2013, I was selected as one of 6 Africans to attend a very much competitive conference in the US. So it was funded by TED, the organization TED, and the Gates Foundation. In the world, there were 20 of us. In Africa, there were 6. And in West Africa, there were 2 of us, myself and one person from Nigeria. And I always tell this story because then I got to understand that the passport I was holding as a Ghanaian citizen was somehow perceived as a lesser passport. Now, this scholarship was fully funded, over $150,000 spent on us, young entrepreneurs, TEDx organizers. And when I went to the US Embassy, I was refused a visa. At the time, I was finishing my master's. The reason that was given to me was that I did not have children and I was not married. So I was really just thinking through this. I mean, at the time, I think I was 24, 23, thereabout. And I was thinking, okay, so this opportunity that was going to give me a lot of exposure as a young entrepreneur, that was going to kind of reinforce my confidence that, look, I was doing something meaningful in Ghana, was completely squashed because I was a Ghanaian who was a student, and my crime was that I was not married and I did not have kids, right? So I was just thinking through this, and to reinforce the point, I was just thinking through this, that all the other scholarship recipients at the time who were not from Africa, like it was a no-brainer because we had a group chat. They just walked into the embassy and got their visas and stuff like that. Easy peasy. And this is where the macro environment and the policy framework at both the national and international levels can be of very grave importance to this discussion. And like one mentioned, that when even we talk about women in Ghana, in fact, 60% of all small to medium enterprises in Ghana are owned by women. 60%. Basically, women are driving the socio-economic activities of Ghana. Like literally, I mean that. So what are the policy framework at the national level, that ensures that women are given the priority, they are given the incentives. And like one mentioned, in Africa, I was raised by a single mom, right? So I understand what, for firsthand, having to experience it, what it means, for a mother who, my mom had an 8-to-5 job as a policewoman. At the same time, she would close from work and then would sell some items in front of the house, just to make sure that I could get education. If there was a support for SMEs, for women, my mom could have gotten some small loan for that business that she was doing, but that did not exist. So I fully agree with both panelists here that at the macro level, at the policy, national and international level, we need to prioritize the well-being of women as well as the marginalized and underserved people from developing countries.
Okay.
Ivan, if you allow me, I would like to make an additional point, because Juan Diego highlighted a topic that I think is of importance as well, the topic of well-being and burnouts. Again, coming from the tech space, I've noticed burnouts around me. I have gone through burnouts myself, and having had this experience, I've actually researched the reasons why, and it looks like women and technology, because they are underrepresented, because they are paving a path and they're facing a lot of microaggressions and so on, and a lot of pressure, are subject to this risk much more than men, for instance, again, in the tech space. I do believe that, again, policies need to address this topic. That is a topic of high importance, that also healthcare systems need to take into account whatever activity we're doing to enhance our well-being and prevent us from getting sick, because at the end of the day, it's externalities that impact society, and economically speaking, the equation is very clear. And I want to give an example of countries that are trying to do it better. Portugal has become a place that attracts a lot of digital nomads, and there's a strong Lisbon scene that is up and coming. Portugal has now a legislation that prevents employers from sending emails to their employees after work hours. And I must say that with my experience, I remember a few years back when I was working in Paris and receiving emails at 3 a.m. and expected to answer them. And I think if that legislation had been in place at that time, that could have avoided a lot of harm. So I think we have to surface the best practices. We have to push for adopting the right legislations and make sure that employers meet show up to their responsibility.
Yeah. And Diego, do you have anything to add on?
Yes, I would just like to go back to these 2 points of citizenship and regulation. So I think that, it's very interesting how we have all experienced issues with citizenship. I hold both a Peruvian and an Argentinian passport because of my two parents who are from these two countries in Latin America. And it's very interesting how, there is always this very hard path of applying or of applying to jobs that can be a great fit both for our own professional careers, but we will contribute so much to these jobs that are, I guess, in the US or in Canada or in the European Union or in other countries, both in Latin America and Africa and Asia. And then you can really see how traumatizing it is to explore job interviews or a job process, depending on where the job is and how the people who are interviewing perceive your geographic and national background. I think that's something that it's definitely it's definitely all over the place. It doesn't matter what type of job do you do or the level of skill or that you have. That's something that plays
we lost you, I think. Juan Diego?
Of that for the issue of citizenship, which I think that it's very interesting, especially now with how many digital nomads they are and how people are working where they have their loved ones or working there where they want to learn a new language or explore a new culture. So if they get the chance, they will want to work from somewhere else. And then that brings me to the issue of regulation, how both our legal frameworks for work and our legal frameworks for taxing work are totally outdated, right? And the countries that are taking smooth change and swiftly change on these issues and know their potential are countries that are going to attract these skilled workers that might be working somewhere else, but might be spending their money and doing tourism for a set of time in one place and then going back to their home. But of course, this becomes highly intricate and complicated when you start playing out all of the tax rules and all of the outdated work rules. So I think definitely being a digital nomad is a privilege. I think that also it's being an informed digital nomad it requires some extra work of realizing what are the tax implications, what are your labor implications, and that's what I guess we're all facing. I think that we have all seen different friends, different colleagues, just having during 2020 and 2021 a real digital nomad experience. But that's something that that's something that public policy will have to capture. And I think that countries that are going to start taking advantage of this and realizing that this is an opportunity for them and their market and their business and also their own professional communities are going to make great advantages on this. So I definitely think that one of the things that we are all conveying is that this flexibility needs to be sort of absorbed by the framework, by the legal framework that several countries are in, and that many people with an outdated mindset will say, oh no, it's not possible because of this or because of that. And that's the thing. These new labor relations and these new work relations cannot be just denied. We need to change the rules of the game to make the rules of the game work for these new digital situation where we can work and we can deliver the goals that, you know, corporations or organizations want, not being physically in one specific place, or making a flexible combination. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan Diego. We will come back to this issue of labor relations and employee-employers relations, because Prince already tackled it at the very beginning, and you have taken it up now. But I'm fascinated listening to you, because you combine actually two things that might be considered to be, the three of you actually, might be considered to be contradictory. On the one hand, you are very aware of the situation, in particular of women you have mentioned, but not only of women in less developed countries, be it in Latin America, be it in Ghana, in Rwanda, in Morocco, you have mentioned that. And the difficulties that, in particular, women, but not only have to launch entrepreneurial activities or to keep them in harsh circumstances like COVID now. But at the same time, you naturally migrate to the discussion on digital nomads, on burnout, on which actually, in my opinion, are two completely different realities. And I would like you I would like to provoke you by saying, don't you think that this discussion on the reworking of the work model is actually very much a northern approach to the topic, and very much an approach focusing on maybe the 40% of world population who can be said to have a job, to have a work, be it self-entrepreneurs or employees. Because actually I have difficulties to discuss and to think about how to approach a discussion on the future of work for the large majority of working age population in most of Latin American countries, even more so in African countries, who actually don't have a work now. They don't have a work model. We should be discussing in those cases about creating a work model for them before rethinking it and reworking it. Don't you agree on that? Because I'm, as I say, fascinated looking at your changes at the two different levels. And I would like to go back to our topic of discussion today and to understand how you reconcile these two levels, the ground level in where you have been working in your professional life, and the digital nomad level where you are practitioners actually today. Maybe we can start by Hannah, yes?
Yes, thank you, Ivan. So first of all, to answer your challenge, I want to say that, yes, of course, in my case, it's very clear. I grew up in the global South. I was educated in a French school and international schools in general. So I would say that we have, and I embody for sure, this combination of approaches. Now, I want to think that the reality is not binary like you outlay. Obviously, in starting both the coding school Le Wagon, that is an international franchise, and I brought it on purpose, but also Duartech, my point was to unlock potential in Morocco, and having in mind and being very aware of what it meant for a lot of people that I would be a trailblazer as a female entrepreneur in the tech space. But the idea, and this is what we want to pursue, and we pursue very much with Duartech, is to address the multi-layered realities of women that are in underserved communities. My hope with internet is that we make it a place where a place of meritocracy, or where basically people with talent meet opportunities wherever these opportunities are. And so we do trainings in digital literacy, and we go further with longer programs. We have a 450 hours program, the Tech Entrepreneurs Path. And with that, we hope that we would empower people that can create projects for their communities, but also access other opportunities. So we've had typically, we paired people from Amsterdam, from Barcelona, to mentor people that are in Amr, in Douar, in a village in Morocco. And that worked out really well. And now we're in discussion typically with the BMW Foundation to send interns from villages in Morocco to Portugal, and they would spend 6 months and come back and have this experience that they can share with their communities, train their communities. So I believe that those topics are interlinked, because, I mean, again, bringing back to my experience, I, as a founder, do not want to sacrifice my needs of flexibility, of mobility. And I try to build a governance that would allow for it. So we have an operational management team on the ground, because the work needs to be done on the ground. But the idea is to unlock potential so that people then become autonomous, have access to other platforms, other opportunities, and then bring along other people. And so I do want to believe that by this work, we enlarge the scope of what is considered now as a privilege and what would become the norm in the future. I want to believe that the African passport will happen anytime soon. I want to believe that, the US and Canada will have the intelligence to review their visa work permit framework, even though I consider that Canada is much ahead compared to the US. Same for Europe. Just not consider internet as a escape path, saying, oh, everyone can have access to it if we have the infrastructure, but actually really creating the right frameworks in terms of capacity building, in terms of legislations for mobility. That's my thought on it.
Thank you. Any of you want to intervene?
Yes, Ivan. So thanks for that provocation, and I really like that. I think two key things, or 2 key points. The first point is that most African countries, or sub-Saharan African countries, have a work model. The problem here we have is that it's undocumented and it's not formalized. So when you go to Nigeria and even parts of Ghana, we have an apprenticeship model where people who want to gain certain skills would go and work under someone we call like a master, someone who has years of experience. You pick up the skill sets. Usually it's like 3 to 4 years. And when you're done, especially in Nigeria, this person who has the experience gives you your startup capital. So when you go to some tribes in Nigeria, there are a lot of business people who don't have like a formal education, but are astute businessmen. Now, all these models are not yet documented, right? And even where they are not, let's say, known to the Western world. And so the reportage on Africa and our work model, usually seems as this dark, hazy, work model that is usually not understood. But there is a work model. And we believe, especially in strong social ties, as opposed to Germany. I still hold my Ghana passport. In fact, I think 2 years ago, a very interesting thing happened where, again, within my company, I think 4 of us as employees were selected to go to the UK for some program. When we got to the airport, they all went through. And when it got to my turn, they took my Ghana passport, and I was delayed for almost 25 minutes. They asked me extra questions, that should prove that I work with a company because it's a global company. And I'm not sure whether they did not believe that someone like me could work for the company in that position or whatever it was. There were one question after the other, lots of queries. And my colleagues were just standing at the other side, just waiting for me for 25 minutes. So I still go through that aspect of still being an African in Europe right? But at the same time, what I believe in is that for the conversation should be contextualized, like I mentioned earlier. Most of the discussions we've had here, for example, in the Harvard Business Review, there was an article a few months ago where about 5,000 employees were surveyed. About 80% of them said, well, salary is not really a priority and they are looking for fulfillment and so forth. But trust me, that is not the case in Ghana. If you go to Ghana now, salary is the priority. People don't really care whether it's fulfillment. You need to survive, right? So the macroeconomic conditions, right, within specific locations differ, and therefore the work models for those specific locations must be attuned to the specific needs of the citizens of those locations. So I fully agree with you. This conversation we're having, we need to first look at the fundamental aspects, the fundamental economic backbone of African countries, right? We in Ghana, we are driven by the informal economy, right? People who don't even, let's say, understand what it means to register a company, but have been in business for the past 30 years and have taken 5 of their children through university to PhD level doing that business, but it's not registered, right? Now, those things need to be documented. We need to have visibility and gain insight using that data in order to come up with something that works.
Thank you very much. Juan Diego, I don't know whether you want to add something?
Yes, I would like to add a very specific experience that I had last year. During the COVID year, I went back home to Peru, and I had the opportunity to work in a very interesting team at the Ministry of Industry, where we had these tasks that Prince you were mentioning in your intervention about reflecting on that country's goals to formalize more companies. But I was just very, very poised by the question on how they were just motivated by metrics of how many companies a month, a year would pass from the informal sector to the formal sector by a process of incorporation, right? So I was just very part of this team, ready to go to work, ready to help with the legal and public policy ideas that I studied and practiced for a long time. And I was just very, very, very confused by how this whole project or this whole idea was only based on metrics. And that was on the metrics of just registering companies and just incorporating them, right? And I was just but there's a whole thing that we need to be designing. And thankfully, the leader of this project and of this team, she really shared this concern and this vision. And we were trying not to only sort of deliver on how do we make easier for companies to incorporate, which leads to incorporating and to formalizing the job, the workforce of that company, but also how can these companies and their workforce survive, especially during the pandemic. And it was very interesting because she was leading the team. I was helping her with public policy. And we were designing this ecosystem for an easier incorporation process, which in Latin America is very complicated. You have to go to a lawyer, get an incorporation minute, go to the notary public, go to the public registry, and so on and so forth. Many, many steps. Those companies usually are operating. They have workers. They pay their workers in the shadow economy, which constitutes around 90 or to 93% of the Peruvian economy. And every single feedback that we were getting from, the higher ranking people at the organization were oh no, but we just care about the metrics. If we formalize, 95 companies this month, we're fine. And we're yeah, but next month, those people will not pay their workers in the formal market. So they will not have social insurance. They will not have, all of these consequences. So what I think about, going back to our topic of the future of work, I think that those factors about, you know, having a flexible and a committed work situation where you can be the best version of yourself, and where you can, you know, use your time and through work, you know, exert your human dignity. I think that that's something that we need to embed in all of these revisions of public policy, that it's not only about having more companies in the formal sector, it's also having these companies sticking and surviving and not having workers on the shadow. You know, whatever the worker law or the labor law says in the country can be very flexible or very rigid, but you know, that changes should be made for the workers to be able to also thrive. And I think that that's one of the main challenges for our developing nations, because usually what they care is about, you know, like these metrics that are not really taking a human-centered approach, as I mentioned at first.
Thank you. You have actually, at least Juan Diego and Hannah, you have both referred, Hannah, more to legislation for creating protective spaces, for healthcare systems. You have mentioned several topics related to legislation, and you have just raised, Juan Diego, the issue of public policies to accompany this process of transformation of the nature of work somehow. And Hannah has also mentioned the way they are trying in Duarte to empower women in particular to benefit the most from the new possibilities created by digital transformation, and by so that this privilege of the new ways of working can be extended or become the norm, as you have said. Do you, and I would like to link that, do you think that there is a clear trend for the new forms of work to empower workers, employees, or it is rather actually just another step in what we have been witnessing since at least the 80s, the 2080s, of actually empowering the employers and the companies to be more productive, more competitive, sometimes at the expense of the employees in many senses? And what can be the public policies that can address this issue, just to rebalance a little bit the distribution of power in this rethinking the world of work game? Maybe Prince, you can start.
Yes, I like to, I mean, that's a very important aspect in terms of, you know, empowering the employee. And from my point of view, I think that empowerment is also dependent on the context. So I say this because having worked, you know, in Ghana and having worked here, I see the empowerment topic completely differently from these two places. For example, in Germany, the empowerment and autonomy topic tends to focus on flexibility. You know, how flexible is the work schedule? Can, let's say, an employee determine when they can go to the office, or can they work from home, and so forth? And that is to them an empowerment, because the issue of, remember I mentioned earlier about autonomy, competency, and relatedness. So the issue of competency is largely solved in Germany. You know, the most employees that I've worked with are extremely competent. You know, they have experience, they are well trained, and so forth. Having worked in Ghana and managing some teams back home, I do, you know, admit that when it comes to the topic of competency, there is, you know, a lot of room for improvement. I've had conversations with CEOs in Ghana who have vacancies, but, you know, cannot seem to fill those vacancies due to this issue of competency. And from my point of view, in order to empower an employee in Africa, it's not just about flexibility, but rather giving them the needed exposure, training, for them to augment their competency, either the scope of their competency or the depth of their competence. I think for me, that is empowering. And the other aspect is also compensation, especially in Africa, where people are usually underpaid. And I myself, I do remember in my first salary after my master's was about $140 a month, you know. So you think about it, how do you empower someone who is grossly underpaid and can barely afford to pay his rent, you know, and survive, you know? So one of the key empowerment for me, points to consider if you're looking at developing countries would be the issue about competency as well as remuneration. The last bit that I think should be at the macro level, policy and national level, is that, you know, in order for this hybrid system, you know, of work to thrive in developing countries, there has to be the needed tools and infrastructure. A typical example is that I like to give an example with my personal life. For example, I had the opportunity to own my first laptop, you know, I think around my third year or something in my undergraduate studies. That's when I first owned a laptop. Right now, after owning the laptop, there was no internet connectivity in the hostel that I lived in. So how do I, for example, right, understand what it means to be flexible when right from school, I'm not even being prepared, or the infrastructure and the tools are not there for me to be prepared for such a workplace? Remember that when we talk about employees, we are looking at the talent pipeline. We need to understand the education. How are the employees being educated through the educational system to kind of rewire their mindset and for them to more or less understand that the world of work has evolved, and therefore we need to also, you know, have certain specific skill sets. So if we are training them wrongly, or we are educating people, the young people wrongly in our educational system by not providing basic infrastructure like internet, then of course they come to the workforce and they are completely lost, and the competency needed for them to adapt and for them to deliver will not be available.
Thank you, Hannah.
Yes, so to answer your question, Ivan, I will share my observations. What I believe is that I see a trend where employers are more and more aware that they need to work better with their employees, whatever the case may be. Again, it's not just in North America, it's because of a lot of things. There's social media pressure, there's a reputation, there's e-reputation, and they just need to be competitive. That is in places where the labor market is competitive, and you really have to fight to keep your best employees, your best talent. I'm now in the US, and the last 6 months all the media have been all over the Great Resignation and so on. Now, the other trend that I'm seeing and I'm witnessing also observing in my conversations sometimes with companies with whom we want to partner is that sometimes they still think that they can just outsource for cheaper in Africa. And my thought is that if you are going to create a position for a talent, regardless of where they are from and they're located, if they're providing for the value, they need to be paid the same. And even more so because when they are paid, a lot of times they are deciding to share with the whole community. They are supporting their entire community. So thinking and trying to address other markets with the mindset of I'm going to pay a fourth of what I'm paying a US worker or a Canadian worker because it's someone based out of Morocco or Senegal or so, is to me unacceptable. And we want to have places to have those conversations, and we want to have regulations also to address this. Now, I want to go back to the point that Juan Diego has made on metrics. And I think it is very common sometimes that there is this disease of metricality, and people just stick into indexes and whatever. And sometimes indexes are completely outdated. However, I think there is a smart and sensical approach to metrics, and it's about really surfacing what are the metrics that are relevant to what we want to, the change we want to see. So typically, and I'll give an example that is very recent. We sent an advocacy note to the Moroccan government with Duartec just a couple of weeks back. And one of the 15 recommendations that we gave is to have an index of digital inclusion that is accessible by everyone, to show how companies are doing when it comes to social mobility promotion, which means that are they recruiting people from vulnerable communities? What are they doing for them? Are they giving trainings? And so on and so forth. And I think, again, by empowering citizens and by providing the trustworthy knowledge about what's going on in the labor market, we are unlocking potential, and we are removing barriers. And again, I mean, the last point that I want to make, because Ivan, you mentioned developed countries versus developing countries. I think developed countries still have a lot to do, and I think this framework needs to be rediscussed. I mean, again, taking the example of France, women are paid on average 30% less than men, and in general around November they have this day of we should stop working from now on because we're not paid from now on until the end of the year. So I believe that we all gain in really kind of promoting metrics that are linked to the SDGs. Even we want to have a framework of assessment. There are things such as B Corps, but it's a long process. It can be hard for a lot of companies. We want to make it accessible so that everyone, every employer is checked against those SDGs that should be common and universal.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting how you come back every time to insist and to underline the importance of legislation, of public action to accompany this process that I fully share, but it is interesting coming from you. Prince, do you want to add something?
I think that's fine. Yeah, I agree with what Hannah said.
Okay, we are coming to the end of our conversation. We have gone through, just the first approach to the topic, of course. I'm going to give you the opportunity to share your last thoughts on the topic. But I would say that some of the key issues we have at least mentioned is the big difference between social values and, as a consequence, on how this new world of work is being shaped in across the Atlantic, between the US and Europe. You mentioned it, Hannah, or between Africa and Europe. You mentioned it, Prince, very clearly. Then the issue of the risks of this process for employees in particular, and for not only for digital nomads, but also for other employees. The importance, as you mentioned, of legislation on non-discrimination on gender basis, on creation of enabling environment for taking advantage of the opportunities created by internet and other technologies, on the legal framework. Juan Diego was mentioning the issue of the tax system on work, which is completely outdated very clearly. And I would say that a way to summarize this very difficult to summarize conversation is that the big challenge is to make sure that the benefits that can accrue from these new forms of work become the norm, not only for a small elite, to which probably we all belong here, but for the wider population in all countries in the world, in both developed and developing countries. However, you can discuss this framework that I fully agree on, Hannah. So I don't know whether you have a last thought on this topic, on rethinking, reworking the work model, before we close our changes. Hannah, maybe?
Yes.
First.
Thank you very much, Ivan. Well, first of all, thank you for moderating this very interesting panel. I very much enjoyed the conversation. I think we're not done reworking the work model. I think we'll always, it's kind of like a continuous process. I agree with you that I insist very much on the role of public policies, because as much as I 100% believe that the private sector is the place to make a change, I think it's fulfilling its mission to do that only when nudged and framed adequately by relevant public policies. So I do believe that we have to make everyone work together towards achieving the SDGs, rising together eventually, to put it this way. And I'll just give this example because it's something that occurred to me. And I thought, earlier I mentioned the situation of healthcare benefits for women, and this ex-colleague of mine who went to the US. For women, we really want to have an open conversation and an honest conversation about what are the needs and the real needs for them to perform and be at their best in the workplace. I'll give the example of period days that have been implemented in India and Egypt, and it is to me extremely relevant. It's also tackling a lot of taboos in those societies, and I think we owe it to ourselves and we owe it to the future generations to make the workplace a place where it is about thriving, it is about bringing new ideas and creating new projects and not getting sick. So I'd like to emphasize that, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Prince?
Hi, Eva. Thank you for such a discussion. I think the conversations, like Hannah said, we need to extend it elsewhere and keep the conversations going. So for me, if we are looking at reworking, this whole topic of reworking, we only can rework when we redesign. And the reason why I believe in designing, because then you give a lot of thoughts, both at the employer level, at the national level, at the international level. Because if we are redesigning the workforce or the workplace or the way of working, then we give a lot more thought. We consider the various aspects of the design to meet specific needs of specific groups, women, people in specific geographic locations, and even the inception or the incorporation of technology and so forth. So we need to really have this conversation at the design level, because I believe that work is first of all designed before it is reworked, or before we can rework it, we need to redesign it. And finally, I would like employers to know that the power of the employee or the relevance of the employee has extended beyond just being a factor of production. We are not just there to meet shareholder, whatever. Those, for example, the issue of agency where, just maximize shareholder profit, and that's the end goal. We need to go beyond that. First of all, the shareholders are human beings. Second of all, the agents, who are the managers, are human beings, and the employees who are supposed to execute whatever objective it is are human beings. So the common factor there are human beings. We need to have that mindset that we don't just lay off employees just because we don't meet the target. We need to meet the specific needs of the human beings. We need to see them as human beings who have families, who have responsibilities towards society and so forth. And that's the only way we can see a real workplace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that we all agree that this topic of the future of work, of the rethinking of the work model, is a key one for our personal future and for the future of humanity. And the conversation, as Hannah has mentioned, is clearly a continuous one. We are not done with it, and this is part of the new work model as well, to lifelong learning and non-linear professional trajectories instead of a linear one. And the idea, as Prince somehow suggested, is to be subjects of this process and not only objects of it, not to suffer it, but to lead it, as just to use your words. So with this as a way of conclusion, I thank you on behalf of the Policy Center for the New South for your contribution, for the very interesting discussion, Hannah, Prince, and Juan Diego. And I reconvene you for next year Atlantic Dialogues. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.